Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper Carter had seen death before. He had waded through battlefields where silence followed in his wake, where his name was whispered as both savior and executioner. But here, in the cold void of space, surrounded by the ruins of his strike team, death did not come for him. It should have. The ambush had been perfect, a calculated strike carried out with clinical precision. One moment, Carter and his SEAL unit were breaching the enemy station, their mission to disable what intelligence had called a communications hub. The next, the walls themselves seemed to fold inward, gravity shifting as pulse rounds and energy blades tore through his men. He had fought as he always did, but even the best training could not outmatch the sheer technological superiority of the enemy. Now he sat in a dimly lit chamber, arms shackled to the seat, his body aching from the electric restraints that kept him still. The walls pulsed with an eerie organic glow, the strange material of the alien craft shifting as if it were alive. He was being studied. Beyond the reinforced glass, a collection of figures observe him with interest, their luminous eyes betraying neither malice nor sympathy. The Galactic Council. He had heard of them before, a coalition of advanced species that had long since established themselves as the arbiters of interstellar law. To them, Earth was an upstart, a young civilization playing at war in a galaxy that had moved beyond it. A tall, silver-skinned figure stepped forward, his elongated features impassive. His name, Carter would later learn, was Xiphos, an interrogator of considerable renown, though in this moment, he was merely another obstacle standing between Carter and freedom. "You are different," Xiphos observed, his voice carrying a strange resonance, as if the words were being translated not just for Carter's ears, but directly into his mind. "Your physiology is primitive, yet resilient." Carter let the words settle before offering a slow, deliberate smile. "Flattery's not going to get you very far." Xiphos tilted his head, unblinking. "You misunderstand. You are an anomaly. Your species has only just begun to grasp the fundamentals of interstellar warfare, and yet you fight as though you have done so for centuries. This concerns us." Carter leaned back as far as his restraints would allow, feigning nonchalance despite the fire burning in his muscles. "If you're looking for an apology, you won't get one." One of the other council members, a reptilian being with deep emerald scales, let out a low, guttural sound. "It is not remorse we seek. It is knowledge. How does a species as young as yours breed killers like you?" The room fell silent. Carter's expression remained unreadable, but inside, his mind raced. They weren't just interrogating him. They were trying to understand him. "You think I'm special?" he asked. "You think I'm the worst my kind has to offer?" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You have no idea what's out there." Xiphos regarded him for a long moment before gesturing to one of the guards. A sharp hiss filled the air as the restraints tightened, sending a pulse of electricity through Carter's body. His jaw clenched, muscles seizing, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of a scream. "You will not leave this place until we understand the truth," Xiphos said. "Why does your species excel in warfare? How do you endure? And most importantly, what makes you dangerous?" Carter forced a breath through gritted teeth. He had been trained to resist interrogation, to endure pain, but this was different. They weren't just breaking his body, they were studying his mind. "You want to know what makes me dangerous?" he said, his voice low, steady. "It's not the weapons we carry. It's not the training, the tactics, or the technology. It's the fact that no matter what you do to me, I won't break. You can hurt me, imprison me, strip away everything I have, but I will still be here, waiting for my moment." He lifted his gaze, meeting Xiphos's unblinking stare. "And when it comes, you won't see it coming." A murmur passed through the assembled council members. For the first time since his capture, Carter saw something flicker behind Xiphos's expression. Not fear, something colder. Calculation. The interrogator turned, addressing the others in his strange, resonant tongue. Carter didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He had seen it before in the moments before a commander ordered an execution. He was running out of time. A sudden shift in the ship's atmosphere sent a faint tremor through the floor. It was barely perceptible, But Carter noticed. He had spent years in war zones where the slightest change in the wind could mean the difference between life and death. Something was happening. One of the guards pressed a device against Carter's neck, injecting a cold surge of liquid fire into his veins. His vision blurred for a moment before snapping back into focus. A test. The murmurs grew louder. The council was undecided. Xiphos turned back to him. Your species has been a curiosity to us. We have watched you expand, fight, struggle. We believed we understood you. His silver eyes darkened. But you are something else. And that concerns me. Carter gave him a slow, lopsided grin. Good. The ship trembled again, stronger this time. Xiphos narrowed his eyes before glancing toward one of the monitors lining the wall. Carter followed his gaze, catching a brief glimpse of something he hadn't expected. An external feed showing the vast expanse of space beyond. There, in the distance, a fleet was moving. Not human. Not council. Something else. Xiphos stiffened. This interrogation is over. The guards moved toward Carter, weapons raised, but he didn't react. Not yet. The moment was coming. He could feel it, like the calm before the storm. He had told them the truth. He would not break. And soon they would understand why. Let me know if you'd like any refinements. Xiphos stood in the dim glow of the control chamber, his fingers steepled before him as he watched the footage on the display. It was a series of compiled records, combat engagements, surveillance reports, and first-hand accounts of one man's actions. The human called Reaper. He had reviewed such files before, but never with the weight that now pressed against his mind. This prisoner, this anomaly, was unlike any they had encountered. The council had assumed they were studying an exceptional soldier. Now, Xiphos was beginning to understand the error in their thinking. They had not captured a soldier. They had captured something far more dangerous. The chamber was silent except for the rhythmic hum of shifting data streams. He was not alone. A towering figure stood beside him, silent but watchful. Thalvek, a warrior from the Korath Dominion, had seen firsthand what the human was capable of. Unlike the rest of the council, he did not observe Carter with cold curiosity or detached analysis. He observed him with something far more valuable. Experience. He should be dead, Thalvek rumbled, his scaled arms crossing over his chest. His voice, a deep, gravelly thing, carried none of the arrogance so often found in his kind. Men like him do not survive against what he faced. Not alone. Xiphos tapped a control panel, and the display shifted. The Battle of Omega Prime, a planet that should have been the graveyard of an entire human strike force. Instead, it had become something else. A legend. Walk me through it, Xiphos said. Thalvek exhaled through his nostrils, the sound akin to the hiss of an ancient predator. Your council studies him like an equation to be solved. But there is no logic to men like him. Only death. I watched it unfold myself. The screen replayed the events in sharp detail. A human strike team had been sent to sabotage Korath's supply lines, believing themselves undetected. They had not been. Thalvek had led an elite response, surrounding the invaders in the canyon ruins of Omega Prime. A perfect trap. The humans fought well, as expected, but they were outmatched. Superior numbers, superior weapons. Victory was inevitable. Until it wasn't. The playback showed what happened next. Carter had adapted. He moved like a phantom through the battlefield, slipping through defenses, striking with clinical precision. He didn't fight like the others. He didn't fight like a man at all. He fought like something else. You were there, Xiphos murmured, watching as Carter, alone and wounded, turned the tide of battle with nothing but his wits and a stolen rifle. Thalvek nodded, his reptilian eyes unblinking. I was. And I watched my warriors die one by one. Not because they were weak, not because they underestimated him, but because they could not comprehend him. Xiphos turned, studying the veteran warrior's expression. There was no shame there, no bitterness, only a quiet, unsettling respect. You fear him, Xiphos observed. Thalvek let out a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a growl. I do not fear men, But I have learned to respect forces of nature. And that is what you have in your hold. He turned to face Xiphos fully, his gaze unyielding. You think you have captured the Reaper, but all you have done is lock yourself in a room with him. The words hung in the air like a warning neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. Beyond the chamber, Carter sat in his cell, his body still aching from the council's experiments. He knew what they were doing. He had been interrogated before, tortured, broken down to his most basic instincts. But this was different. They weren't trying to extract information. They were trying to understand something fundamental about him. And that made them more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. He shifted slightly, testing the restraints. They had grown tighter since the last session. They were learning, adjusting. That was fine. So was he. The door to his cell hissed open, and Xiphos stepped inside, flanked by 2 guards armed with weapons Carter had already analyzed for potential vulnerabilities. The interrogator studied him for a long moment before speaking. You are not what we expected. Carter smirked, despite the dull ache in his ribs. Yeah, I get that a lot. Xiphos remained impassive. We have studied your wars. Your species thrives in conflict. But you are something else entirely. Even among your own kind, you are an outlier. Carter shrugged. Every species has its monsters. Xiphos tilted his head, considering. Do you consider yourself a monster? Carter's smirk faded. He leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed, his gaze locked onto Xiphos's. No. But you should. The words carried no bravado, no arrogance. Just a simple, undeniable truth. Xiphos remained silent for a moment before turning to the guards. Increase surveillance. And double the restraints. Carter exhaled slowly as they left, the door sealing behind them. He wasn't sure how much longer they planned to keep him here. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were afraid. And fear made people reckless. It was only a matter of time. The air inside the cell was stale, thick with the hum of alien technology pulsing beneath the walls. Carter sat motionless, his breathing slow and measured. He had spent enough time in captivity to understand that patience was often the deadliest weapon. The Galactic Council believed they had contained him, studied him, unraveled his nature like a puzzle. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed the Reaper could be caged. Footsteps approached, sharp and deliberate. The cell door slid open, and Xiphos entered once more, but this time he was alone. No guards. No council members observing from the shadows. Just the interrogator and the prisoner. The shift in dynamic was not lost on Carter. He had seen this before, the moment when an enemy chose to step closer, believing the lion had been declawed. Xiphos clasped his hands behind his back, his silver eyes scanning Carter with that same detached curiosity. We have debated your fate, he began, his voice calm, deliberate. Some believe you should be executed. Others think you should be studied further. But I have come to a different conclusion. Carter said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence unnerved men who were used to being in control. Xiphos continued. We have long considered humanity a primitive species, but your existence complicates that assumption. You are not an anomaly, Lieutenant Carter. You are an inevitability. The question is no longer how your kind became this way, but rather what must be done about it. Carter smirked. And let me guess, you're here to offer me a deal? Xiphos tilted his head slightly. Of a sort. We have detected an approaching fleet, one that does not belong to your people or ours. It moves with purpose, and its intent is clear, conquest. The Council has faced war before, but this enemy is unlike any we have encountered. Carter leaned forward slightly. Let me guess. They don't fight like diplomats. They don't engage in discussions or peace talks. They just come and they take. Xiphos gave a small nod. They are called the Vorn, nomadic, merciless. They do not negotiate, nor do they conquer in the traditional sense. They consume. They reduce civilizations to ruin, harvesting resources, technology, even biology for their own twisted evolution. Carter exhaled slowly. He had heard whispers of species like this in classified briefings back on Earth. But hearing about it in theory was different from watching an enemy powerful enough to terrify the Galactic Council. "And let me guess," he said. "You want me to fight for you?" Xiphos clasped his hands behind his back. "You misunderstand. This is not a request. You will fight, whether willingly or by force. We have observed your ability to adapt, to survive against overwhelming odds. We need that now more than ever." Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "You people spend all this time trying to figure out what makes me dangerous, and now you want to point me at your enemies? I hate to break it to you, but I don't fight for the people who put me in chains." Xiphos studied him for a long moment, then said, "Your refusal is irrelevant. The Vorn will come whether you wish to fight or not. And when they do, this council will not hesitate to use every resource at its disposal to ensure survival. That includes you." Carter leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He had been in unwinnable situations before, backed into corners where survival seemed impossible. But this was different. This was not just a fight. This was something else entirely. A test. "You know what happens when you push a man into a fight he doesn't want?" Carter asked, his voice low. "You make an enemy you can't control. And I promise you, Xiphos, you do not want me as an enemy." Xiphos did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his robes, pulling out a small device. With a flick of his fingers, Carter's restraints unlocked, clattering to the floor. His muscles ached from a strain, but he did not move. "Not yet." "You misunderstand again," Xiphos said. "This is not about control. This is about necessity. You may despise us, but you hate them more. And unlike us, they will not hesitate to burn your world to the ground." Carter rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. He had spent his life fighting wars that others started, following orders handed down from men who had never seen the battlefield. But this was something bigger, something worse. Xiphos took a step back. "You are free to make your choice, Lieutenant Carter. But understand this, the Vorn do not leave survivors. And when they come, you will fight. Not for us. Not for yourself. But because there will be no other option." He turned and exited the cell, leaving Carter alone with his thoughts. The door sealed shut behind him, the silence pressing in once more. Carter flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulders as blood flowed freely again. The decision was already made, whether he wanted it to be or not. Because Xiphos was right. There was no other option. Carter stood at the edge of the command deck, staring at the vast expanse beyond the viewing window. The stars stretched endlessly cold and distant, but his focus was on the monstrous shapes emerging from the void. The Vorn fleet had arrived. Jagged, obsidian-colored vessels moved in eerie synchronization, their hulls pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence. These were not warships in the traditional sense. They were living things, organic constructs built for destruction. Behind him, Xiphos and a handful of high-ranking council members stood in tense silence. Even the ever-composed interrogator seemed rigid, his silvered features betraying the weight of what was coming. Thalvek, the Korath warrior, stood off to the side, his claws flexing instinctively. There was no mistaking it. Every single being in the room, no matter how powerful, feared what was about to unfold. Carter exhaled slowly. "You waited too long." Xiphos shifted slightly. "We did not expect them to find us so quickly." Carter let out a dry chuckle. "You never do." The ship trembled as the first Vorn warforms deployed, launching toward the fleet like predatory insects. Carter had seen brutality before. Humans were no strangers to war, but there was something about the Vorn that felt fundamentally different. There was no hesitation in their movements, no strategy beyond sheer, overwhelming force. They existed to consume. A cold certainty settled over him. This wasn't a war. This was an extinction event waiting to happen. He turned to face the council members. "You want to live through this? You're going to have to listen to me. And that means no debates, no discussions, no votes. From here on out, I give the orders." A ripple of discontent passed through the assembled council members, but Xiphos raised a hand, silencing them. His silver eyes met Carter's, assessing, weighing. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Carter wasted no time. He pointed toward the tactical display. Your forces are spread too thin. You're trying to defend everything at once, which means you're defending nothing. He gestured at a cluster of council warships. Pull those vessels back and reinforce your central line. The Vorn don't break formations. They drive straight through. You funnel them, you contain them, and you burn them down before they get inside the perimeter. A nearby officer hesitated. That strategy risks losing key outposts. They're already lost, Carter snapped. You fight like politicians. The Vorn fight like predators. You either accept the losses now, or you lose everything. Xiphos turned to the others. Do as he says. Hesitation lingered, but commands were relayed. The fleet shifted, repositioning into tighter formations. Carter watched as the first Vorn impact hit, a brutal clash of fire and flesh. The council ships opened fire, energy beams slicing through the void. Some of the Vorn vessels shattered, but others absorbed the hits, their bodies regenerating faster than the weapons could tear them apart. Carter cursed under his breath. They adapt faster than I thought. Falvek stepped forward. Then we adapt faster. The ship trembled again as another wave of Vorn slammed into the defenses. Carter's mind worked quickly, piecing together the way the enemy moved, how they responded, how they learned. Then he saw it, the pattern. They're targeting your command structure, he said. They don't care about your weapons or defenses. They're going for the leadership, cutting the head off the snake. Xiphos narrowed his eyes. How do you know this? Because that's exactly what I do. For the first time, Xiphos looked unsettled. Carter turned back to the display. We give them a target, something they can't resist. He pointed at the council's flagship. You move this ship to the front of the formation, make it look vulnerable, make it look like the easiest kill. When they swarm it, we hit them with everything we've got. Xiphos hesitated. You are suggesting we use ourselves as bait? Yeah, Carter said. And if we do it right, we survive. The silence stretched. Then Xiphos gave a single nod. Do it. The orders were given. The flagship moved forward, its shields flickering to half power. Almost immediately, the Vorn reacted. Their formations shifted, converging on the seemingly vulnerable vessel. Carter braced himself. Wait for it. The Vorn drew closer, closing the gap with terrifying speed. Wait. The first wave was nearly on top of them. Now, every remaining warship unleashed a concentrated barrage, the sudden eruption of energy tearing through the Vorn ranks. Explosions rippled through the battlefield. The organic vessels shrieked as their regenerative abilities failed against the overwhelming firepower. One by one, they fell, torn apart before they could recover. The fleet trembled with the force of the attack, but when the smoke cleared, the immediate threat was gone. Carter exhaled, rolling his shoulders. That's how you fight a war. Xiphos studied him carefully. You saved us. Carter turned to face him. No, I bought you time. They'll be back, and next time they'll be smarter. Falvek stepped forward, his expression unreadable. And when that time comes, Carter cracked his knuckles, staring out at the wreckage beyond. Then you'll see why they call me Reaper.